We're going to change in policing. We have to. It has to be a movement that involves everybody. We need to reimagine and refigure out, if you will, how we're going to move forward as a country and as an organization to make things better for everybody.
And that is Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best opening our show, responding to protests against police. She has a lot more to respond to now after a deadly shooting in the so-called CHOP. More on the story a little bit later on in our program. Welcome, everybody, to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, the Coffee Break podcast that helps you get a better understanding of a changing political landscape in Seattle. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm your host. I'm also a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. Joining me, as always, is Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, Brian. Good to talk to you again.
Back at you. Our background noise sponsor is City Grind Espresso from the first floor of City Hall. They are shut down right now because of the coronavirus pandemic, but we definitely appreciate their support, and we would appreciate your support too. Please look for Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon, and please help us out. We're going to start things off with Right Here, Right Now. Okay, so a lot ahead for the Seattle City Council in this fourth week of June. Their June 22nd agenda, another crowded one. Amidst all the protest activity over racial inequity, a lot happening there, there is some other business happening too, specifically with regard to affordable housing. So the council will be voting to transfer ownership of about 4 acres of land in the Mount Baker neighborhood from the University of Washington to the city. This is a building that used to be a laundry facility for the UW. The facility shut down in 2018. A lot of people upset about that, a loss of 100 union jobs. But here we are with labor champion, Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, sponsoring this bill. And I'm bringing this up, Kevin, because it might seem like another ho-hum land transfer, but we are talking about possibly 1,000 homes coming out of this, and they're right next to the Mount Baker Light Rail Station. Plus, there's a push for childcare, early learning facilities there. In this present day of having so many difficult issues to grapple with, this seems like a relatively easy decision for the council to say yes to something like this.
Well, yeah, saying yes is easy, and a super easy part, and they're certainly going to do that. This is a classic example of what's called transit-oriented development, which is redeveloping or developing some piece of property right near a major transit center, so that you can have a mix of affordable and market rate housing there, but really take advantage of just the available transit right there, so that you can have a bunch of people who don't need to own a car. Right. And can live more cheaply right next to transit and get everywhere that they need to go. And, 4 acres, it's about 3.8 acres.
Yes.
That having that much land suddenly available
in the middle of the city, right? Yeah.
Right next to a transit center is unheard of. So this is just an amazing, amazing opportunity. And it's going to be a mix of affordable housing and there's a little bit of commercial development, as you mentioned, childcare.
Yeah, which is a big deal for the council right now. Certainly, a couple new moms on the council. They're talking about this a lot.
Now, Councilmember Morales, has brought up the point, and she is the council member whose district this is in.
Yes,
has said that it may take a few years and potentially longer, depending on how things go, for the whole plan for redevelopment of this to get developed. So to speak, and
get rolling.
And then contracted out to various organizations to go develop different pieces of it. And she wants to make sure that, since as she put it, this is sort of the gateway to the Mount Baker neighborhood, that it doesn't become basically an eyesore for somewhere between 5 and 10 years while they wait for it to develop and just sit there as a big empty 4 acres right off of the light rail station there. So she in particular really wants to move fast on this and make sure that the community as a whole has a big say in deciding what goes in there and the time frame for that.
Yeah, and we're talking about buildings. We're talking about a 95-foot height limit on these buildings here. So we're talking about a pretty big project here potentially. I just to touch on this before we move on, Kevin, any concerns still over those 100 jobs lost back in 2018? I know that was an argument that Councilmember Sawant was concerned about there, sort of a robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of what happened here. But we are talking about some really big benefits for the city with this housing, I guess.
Yeah, and I really think they didn't shut down the laundry facility so they could give the land over to the city, right? Giving land over to the city was a benefit that came after the fact. Shutting down the laundry facility, it's not like UW doesn't have as much laundry to do as they did back then. Right? Sure. It's just going to different organizations. I don't think anybody's really tracked down, who's doing UW's laundry now. right? So it may be that there are a bunch of other union jobs that are just in different organizations rather than in the direct employment of UW.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Just going down the list on the agenda here, the council also looking at repealing the crimes of drug traffic loitering and prostitution loitering. They've been thinking about that for some time. But there was one piece I really did want to key in on here, Kevin. Gig worker hazard pay. So looking at last week, June 15th, the council voted unanimously to require food delivery companies such as Instacart and Grubhub to pay gig workers an extra $2.50 per order, and to do so basically for the duration of the coronavirus civil emergency we're in the middle of here. And we are the first city in the nation to do this. And this is still a developing story, just to give people some background here. So this legislation initially was for $5 per order. It's been dropped down to $2.50, half of that. It does not apply specifically to ride-sharing services. It initially did so, but it does not. So these transportation network companies, TNCs like Uber and Lyft, the council is working on other legislation for those companies, as we've talked about on this program. Kevin, I know we've been back and forth on this. Were you surprised to see the council move so quickly on this, especially at a time when they really seem to have their hands full with a lot of issues around police reform?
Well, I think for them, part of the issue was just what's happening in the coronavirus right now, where
got to keep an eye on that too. Yeah,
where the food delivery folks had to do a bunch of extra cleaning, right, and the TNC drivers too. The TNC drivers part of it got complicated because there's a simultaneous negotiation going on for minimum wage for them, based upon an executive order that the mayor signed last fall around that. So the last Monday, the council did, 3 big last minute changes to this legislation that sort of came out of their, weeks and weeks of negotiations with the various stakeholders around this. So they reduced it, as you mentioned, from including TNC drivers. They cut out the TNC drivers, so it's just food and grocery deliveries. They cut the rate from $5 a trip down to $2.50 a trip. And then they passed another change, and this is something Morales really pushed hard on, was to not allow the companies to pass that charge on to their customers.
Yes, that's a big piece of this.
And specifically, she did that actually not for restaurant deliveries, but just for grocery deliveries, because she said she saw that as an essential right now as we're all trying to stay home and not pass COVID virus along to other people. And so making sure that groceries didn't become too expensive for people was something that she saw and yet still allow them to stay safe at home and get their groceries was an important thing for her.
Well, just in looking at that, Kevin, do you buy Instacart's side of the story? And I should point out that company is talking about filing suit against the city of Seattle. Instacart has basically argued that this law is going to put a strain on grocery and food delivery, which are, as they call it, essential services during this time of crisis. How do you look at that? I know we've tried to talk about this other side of the story before, but I think we're on our way to seeing another lawsuit for the city, bottom line here.
It could be. I don't know if they'll win or not. The question is really, has anybody actually done the math on, other than the company, the companies themselves that are doing this kind of delivery as to sort of how the economics of this works out? How much per trip is Instacart or Postmates or these companies making? And
they're not all that forthcoming about those dollars.
But the flip side of this is that the drivers have real costs that they actually have to cover out of their own pocket right now, right? They have to clean their vehicle between trips. So how much money are they spending and how much of their time do they have to go off the clock to go do that? So what's the cost to them to make sure that these vehicles are clean and not transmitting COVID?
Yeah, so much happening with the for-hire businesses in Seattle right now. So we'll definitely keep track on what happens with the TNCs there as that moves into some of the drivers for Uber and Lyft. Thanks for that input, Kevin. Let's move on to Now Hear This. All right, so this is where we listen into something our local leaders have said over the past week. And this time around, we're talking about generating revenue. A few plans are emerging here, and it's difficult to juggle all these, but we'll try to break this down as we can through the program here. I want to talk first about Councilmember Mosqueda's plan to tax the payroll of big businesses. It's called Jumpstart Seattle. It would raise about $86 million this year, $200 per year in years to come. It would apply to companies with annual Seattle-based payrolls of at least $7 million and would only tax the compensation of employees making $150,000 or more. Those are very important pieces. We're going to come back to them. But first, Councilmember Mosqueda's rationale. She says, after the state failed to pass a regional big business tax a few months ago during the short session, it's now up to the city of Seattle to come through. Here's what she said.
The state legislature may reconvene a special session soon, but we don't have a lot of indication that they will be taking up progressive revenue at this point. So to us falls the responsibility to step up and make sure that there's sufficient revenue.
Okay, Kevin, this is one of those stop me if you've heard this one before situations for me. Jumpstart Seattle sounds a lot like the Tax Amazon plan. And while it might not have the same name, Amazon appears to be very much singled out here when you look at how this is a tiered tax. These companies in the so-called top tier at $1 billion in payroll per year would pay the most. So what company in our city is paying out $1 billion per year? I think it's Amazon, right? Are there other people on that list?
It's certainly Amazon, maybe Boeing.
Okay.
But depending on how many employees they officially have down at Boeing Field.
Yeah, right.
But they're also just announced that they're cutting a lot of that back. So it may be that by the end of this year, they're below that. So it certainly looks like the top tier of this, companies that have $1 billion or more of Seattle-based payroll, is really one company. So, and that's going to be a legal issue for this because it really looks like this is designed to be punitive to Amazon.
Yeah. It's difficult to figure out exactly where these numbers are because, again, we're looking at this, and the Office of Economic Development doesn't have those direct numbers from the companies. So I know Councilmember Mosqueda is still working on this to try to figure out who is in that top tier here, but it certainly looks like Amazon up there. I did want to point out there, while that is a similarity between her plan and the Sawant-Morales plan, there are some differences here. Can we break some of those down? What did you see as the main differences between the Mosqueda plan and the Sawant-Morales plan? Other than it looks like Councilmember Mosqueda's plan actually has some support, broader support on the council.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. Mosqueda's plan altogether, while for the reasons we talked about, is even more of an Amazon tax than Sawant's. At the same time, is really trying to focus much more on the companies that have been more successful in the area. The thing they would love to be able to do is to tax it based on income, right?
Yes,
but they can't really do that in a progressive way. So they're trying to come up with other metrics that they can use to approximate that. And one of them is, well, how many employees do you have that are making at least $150,000?
Right.
So exempting all salaries that are below $150,000 really exempts a lot of companies from this, right? And Mosqueda's estimate was that between the $7 million payroll sort of floor and only taxing salaries of $150K and up, that eliminates 97% of the companies in Seattle. Again, they're a little fuzzy on the numbers because they don't they can't get a lot of specifics from the state on this, but there's that. The other thing is, in their spending plan, particularly for the first year,
a lot more specificity.
For 2020, they actually want to dip into the city's two emergency funds.
Yes.
To fund about $86 million to spend this year, and then use the first $86 million that they earn from the new payroll tax revenues next year to repay that.
Right.
But that, at this point, we're still all waiting for Mayor Durkin to release her proposed rebalance budget, and chances are they're going to want to tap into that same fund. So
and
that needs to get reconciled.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to put this in context, folks, the city is in the middle of this emergency budget rebalancing. It's going on right now. It's going to happen through the month of July. This $200 to $300 million budget hole that we've been talking about for the past couple of months now, that's what the city's really trying to tackle here. And I think looking at this, there was a public hearing on the schedule for Tuesday of this week here on this rebalancing package. That's been canceled, and it's because we don't have a budget from the mayor just yet. And I think Councilmember Mosqueda is trying to play along here. She wants to wait on having that public hearing until we see the mayor's budget and council members have a chance to respond to that. Your thoughts about that? Because I know the budget committee is going to be meeting again on Wednesday of this week. They're going to be talking a little bit more about this, but they can't get too specific because we don't have the mayor's numbers yet.
Yeah, and I think they were my guess is they were close on having the numbers.
Yeah.
And then the whole situation with the protest happened and the CHOP and this big push to cut the police budget, right, and fund other programs. And that really, that puts the mayor, and it's going to put the council in a tough spot.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's a lot to talk about with that one, and this whole concept of having an inquest on what is spent on the Seattle Police Department, I'm sure is going to be continuing at the city council level here. But I wanted to talk too about another piece to the puzzle here. Andrew Lewis, Councilmember Andrew Lewis, has a proposal talking about a city-imposed tax on capital gains, the selling of stocks here. He is talking about an excise tax on sales of assets. So this would exclude real estate and retirement accounts and would be capped at 1%, generating around $37 million annually. So this falls under the umbrella of the wealth tax that the city of Seattle has been working on the past couple of years. That was a tax that was ruled unconstitutional last year by the State Court of Appeals, but it did leave open this window here, this option of a 1% tax on net income that I think Councilmember Lewis is trying to take advantage of with this new tax here. I wanted to talk about this because this would be something very novel for a city to try to pass too on its own, a capital gains tax like this.
Well, and there's going to be all sorts of legal challenges.
Oh, yeah.
This is, a question about, what exactly is a capital gains tax is another one of these big questions. And as far as the IRS is concerned and the vast majority of other states, a capital gains tax is an income tax.
Yeah.
Right? So now under this ruling that the Court of Appeals handed down last year, that means that it wouldn't be progressive. It would have to be flat.
Yes.
And, and at some level that's still going to be progressive because capital gains are taxes that that wealthier people tend to have. Income that wealthier people tend to have rather than straight up wages. Mm-hmm. But then the issue here is that one of the many issues here is the state constitution says that you have to tax at the same rate an entire class of property.
Yes, right.
So then are capital gains a different class of property of income, and therefore a different class of property than wage income? Mm-hmm. Ooh, I mean, that's gonna there is no case law that sort of explains how to think about that. Yeah. And Lewis is going a little further, and he's sort of flipping over to the other side and saying that capital gains tax isn't an income tax, that it's an excise tax. It's just because you have to do this transaction where you actually have to sell it. Right. Then it's an excise tax on on basically the transaction of selling it. But that is really unlikely to hold up in court. Yeah, so, I know. He from the prosecuting attorney's office, of course, has thought through some of these issues, but there will be a lot more still ahead on this. I thought it was wise of him to carve out that piece for retirement accounts, to carve out that piece for real estate here, to try to really focus in on these capital gains taxes that you mentioned. But that makes it even harder. Right? Okay. If he says, capital gains, but not for sale of real estate. Right. Now it's if it's an income
now he's
tax,
picking and choosing. It's not a flat tax at all.
If it's income tax, then it's definitely not all covering the entire class of property rate, and it's definitely illegal.
Wow. Well, just to wrap up on this whole revenue piece, Kevin, we've got this proposal from Councilmember Lewis. We've got this proposal from Councilmember Mosqueda. The Sawant Morales proposal, in some way, shape, or form, is still out there too. Is there one that survives out of this? I know some council members have been backing Councilmember Mosqueda. I know that the business community, at least the Downtown Seattle Association, not happy about a tax on jobs, certainly here. Do you have an idea about which one of these proposals might actually survive? Which one has the best chance of surviving, do you think?
Mosqueda certainly, at this point, has 5 council members, including herself, as co-sponsors of it. Right. Yeah. So that is looking very, very good. There's lots of more. There's lots of air cover for everybody on that. Right. Right. Mayor hasn't said, she's still non-committal on this, but 5 is a really, really great start on that, and they have enough labor and business support that they can probably
coming out to say yes on it. Mm-hmm.
And largely there really aren't legal issues with it, right? There's some logistical issues, but there aren't legal issues. Lewis's is not mutually exclusive from that. So Mosqueda's and Lewis's could both pass,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And Lewis's is really focused on, if you remember a few weeks back, the Third Door Coalition.
Yes, right.
Lewis participated, as did Mosqueda, in their announcement. And
yes.
what he really seems to want to do with the money he would raise from this capital gains tax is pump a bunch of money into permanent supportive housing.
For the homeless specifically, right.
Yeah, which is what the Third Door Coalition is trying to do.
Right, right. Huge pieces there. I guess what you're saying, it looks like this whole Amazon tax discussion that we've been having over the past couple months gets pushed to the side. Is that what you're sensing here?
You mean if you're talking about specifically the Sawant and Morales
yeah,
proposal?
That's right.
Yeah, I think at this point, particularly since they wanted to pass that as emergency legislation that requires the mayor to approve it, and the mayor has said that there is no way in heck she's approving it. Right?
Don't you cuss in front of me, Kevin. All right.
Like I said several weeks back, that was dead on arrival. It's still equally dead on arrival. Right?
All right. Fair enough. Let's move on to what's next. A very serious story here. We're talking about CHOP, the Capitol Hill organized protest here, had a fatal shooting there very early Saturday morning, the 20th. A 19-year-old man dead, another young man critically injured. Seattle police had tried to respond, but were kept out. Kevin, I know there's still a lot flying around with this. We haven't heard the mayor speak out about this as of the weekend of Father's Day weekend. We haven't heard the chief of police speak out about this either, but we've talked about this before as an experiment in democracy. Did the experiment just fail? How do you look at that?
Well, as you mentioned, there's still a lot forthcoming about this. Right?
Yeah.
We actually don't know who it was.
Yeah, they're looking at some video, etc. Mm-hmm.
They're looking at some video. The person escaped from the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think I'm certainly trying to withhold judgment about exactly what happened and what sort of drove it until we hear from that. It certainly raises a bunch of questions around what public safety means in a space like this.
Yes,
there are disputed reports about whether the police officers were brought in or not. What happened was they called 911. And the Seattle Fire Department medical units came to sort of the edge of the area, but at that point it was still an unsecured shooting scene. Right?
Yes.
And policy for fire department and their medical personnel and their fire safety personnel is they don't go into a scene until it's actually been secured. When there's a hazard like that, when it's like an active shooting scene, there are acts of violence going on there, they don't go in until the police has actually secured that. And the police have said, they showed up and they said that a crowd of protesters prevented them from entering the scene. And I think that still needs to be sorted out because there's some disputes to the extent of how much that really happened or not. So, I haven't seen clear evidence either way on that. So, all this still needs to get sorted out and we need to really understand what happened. But these are the hard parts of things of experimental democracy, right? If you want to sort of do your own public safety, if you want to do your own
medical help,
care,
etc.,
right, then you really need to be prepared for the whole range of what might happen. This is this is a new thing for them, and there were some stumbles all around. There's certainly some stumbles for the police department and the fire department and how they responded, how they talked about what they did.
Sure. And it's disheartening because I think, for better or for worse, and a lot of people have different reactions to what the CHOP is, this was a largely nonviolent group that was up there talking, having lectures, things of this nature, almost a festival-type atmosphere up there, but I think an important one politically, too. And to see something like this happen, I think it raises the specter you're talking about here. At a certain point, there has to be a public safety piece to this that's recognized on either side. When there aren't necessarily specific leaders from different groups or whatever else, it makes it very hard to do that. So this experiment, I guess very much a work in progress. It's terrible to see people get hurt and killed.
Yep, it's tragic.
Yeah, we've got a lot still ahead with that, and I know we're going to follow that up throughout this week here, this fourth week of the month of June. So we'll continue to follow what's going on with the CHOP. But we did want to wrap things up here, hopefully on a lighter note, because as we are recording this podcast, we wanted to make sure that we let people know Father's Day is a very important day. I'm a dad. Kevin is too. And Kevin, I know you like making treats for your kids. You go first. I actually had one of my kids make a treat for me, but what do you got coming out of the oven?
Well, a few weeks ago, I made the DoubleTree Hotel chocolate chip cookies, like their secret recipe.
Just released on that recipe, folks. Yeah.
And I was making them again last night, and I realized after the grocery store closed that I was missing one of the ingredients. So
okay.
You're supposed to use rolled oats in it, and I didn't have any, so I used oat flour instead, and they actually turned out pretty good.
Okay.
A little different texture, but tastes about the same.
Okay, that's an important piece. I have a daughter who, inspired by Kevin, I should say, she was a proud recipient of the Brave Tart book that Kevin sent our way not too long ago. She's freestyled on a couple of different recipes now. She made something, she only called them the Father's Day surprise bars. They look like kind of, we got some chopped nuts on the top or whatever else. So start with a brownie base, peanut butter on top of that, and then what she has described as a marshmallow fudge on top of that. Not as thick and crazy as, I love fudge because it's always crazy, but it's got a lightness to it that is absolutely delightful. And I'm going to take a little bite here, Kevin, just to give you the play-by-play.
I'm going to do some cookie here.
Wow. This is a daughter who knows me well. This is a gooey and chewy chocolate mess. Always good stuff here. I got to say, Kevin, happy Father's Day to you and all the dads out there. I wanted to say that.
You too. Happy Father's Day.
All right, absolutely. Folks, thank you for being with us here. And I wanted to say, the next time you want to know what's going on in local politics, we're here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. So give us a listen and find out what's brewing. Reach us via email at seattlenewsviewsandbrews@gmail.com. Subscribe on iTunes or Spotify. Please support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. And thanks, as always, for listening.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.